Undercover CEO buys onion rings at his own diner, stops cold when he hears two employees plotting. He just wanted a quiet lunch, but one overheard conversation turned onion rings into a full-blown takedown of betrayal. Would you have caught the lie before it was too late? The early April sunlight spilled across the dusty windows of the Iron Skillet Diner, its golden beams casting just enough glow to highlight the peeling paint in time-worn window frames. Sitting inside his parked pickup nearby, Ethan Ward tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed intently on the familiar, faded sign above the entrance. 34 days. He sighed. 34 days since that morning when a sudden, crippling stomach pain had dropped him right there on the familiar kitchen floor. The emergency surgery had left more than just a thin scar across his abdomen. It forced him, for the first time in his life, to step away from the place that had been his entire world for the past 7 years. "You don't have to control everything, Ethan," his doctor had once said with a calm, reassuring tone. "Sometimes, letting go is a form of growth." Letting go. For a man who knew every creak of the floorboards, every crack in the bar counter, who remembered every regular customer's name and life story, that was like cutting off a part of his own soul. But today, something inside him felt unsettled, a restlessness he couldn't quite name. With the brim of his cap pulled low, wearing a worn-out jacket and faded jeans, Ethan glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. 3 days unshaven, hair tousled, eyes clouded with fatigue. Perfect. No one would recognize the once polished, sharp-looking owner beneath this rugged exterior. The bell above the door jingled as he pushed it open, and the familiar scents rushed to meet him. Hot oil, freshly brewed coffee, and the sweet, comforting hint of maple syrup. It should have felt warm, comforting, but then he noticed it. It wasn't the smells. It wasn't the decor. It was the atmosphere. The space, once vibrant with laughter and chatter, now sat under an unfamiliar silence. The usual cheerful banter between Allie and Jerry was gone. Maria, the dedicated manager who always wore a gentle smile, walked with a heaviness, her shoulders hunched, as if carrying the weight of a stormy sky. Her fingers gripped the clipboard tightly, her eyes scanning the tables not with ease, but with quiet, anxious calculation. Ethan was led to a secluded corner, from where he could watch nearly the entire diner. He settled into the seat, taking in every detail. Some of the tables and chairs had been rearranged. A new item was scrawled onto the menu board, one he had never approved. Even the cherished photo wall, the memories he'd painstakingly curated, had been altered. Ethan let out a hollow chuckle. When had his second home become this unfamiliar? A plate of steaming hot fries was set before him, their scent rich and enticing. The signature fries he had spent 3 long years perfecting. They were always the standard by which everything else was measured. He slowly picked up a fry and brought it to his lips. The crunch was there, the richness too, but something was off. The soul of the dish seemed gone. And then faint voices drifted from the service counter. "Another last-minute shift change?" Allie's voice, low but laced with frustration. "I had plans with the kids and now I have to cancel. Again. You think I've got it any better?" Tina sighed, her eyes nervously darting toward the kitchen. "He already made it clear, if we don't like it, we're free to leave." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You mean Chase?" Ethan froze. That name didn't exist in any of his official staff files. "Yeah, the owner's nephew," Allie muttered. The fry slipped from Ethan's fingers. He let out a dry, hollow laugh. 42 years of life, single, with no close relatives, no nieces, no nephews, and now, suddenly a nephew. The voices kept cutting into him like knives. "He's basically running the place now. Haven't seen the old boss back in forever." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. His pulse throbbed in his temples. Keeping his face composed, he scanned the diner more carefully. And then, there he was, a sharply dressed young man moving through the space with an air of smug authority. His expensive watch glinted under the dull lights, his smile smug, his posture radiating arrogance, as if he owned every square inch of the place. In that instant, Ethan Ward understood. He couldn't sit on the sidelines any longer. A stranger was, standing on the ground he had built from nothing, claiming blood ties that didn't exist, running his life's work like it was some sleazy business empire. Ethan clenched his fists. This time, he wasn't here just to watch. The moment he heard the name Chase Donovan, every dormant instinct inside Ethan roared back to life. That overheard conversation had sounded the alarm in his soul. He had no nephew, never had. So who the hell was this Chase Donovan? And worse, why was he acting like he held the fate of the iron skillet in his slick, well-manicured hands? Ethan picked up his glass of water, trying to hide the faint tremble in his hand beneath the table. He watched in silence, the perfect image of an ordinary customer, but his mind was anything but calm. Every thought roared like a raging firestorm. And soon enough, the star of the show made his grand entrance. Chase Donovan. He strutted out from behind the counter, wearing a sleek designer shirt, sleeves rolled up to showcase a flashy Rolex, completely out of place amid the warm scent of butter, syrup, and frying oil. His smirk held that unbearable brand of arrogance, the kind that belonged to someone who believed he was untouchable. Just as Ethan had suspected, Chase wasn't busy running the diner. Instead, he spent his time flirting with young female customers and, worse, keeping a hawk's eye on every receipt, every tip envelope the staff handed over. Ethan leaned just enough to get a clear view. Chase made no effort to be discreet. When a young server laid down the rolled-up tip money, Chase casually strolled over, pulled out a chunk right in front of everyone, and stuffed it into his own pocket. The employees stood silent, heads lowered, swallowing their pride. He didn't walk like a manager. He moved like a tyrant. Ethan's gaze found Maria across the room. She hurried between tables, her shoulders heavy, her eyes distant. This woman, who once treated the diner like a second home, now moved through it like a ghost, drained and defeated. His grip tightened on the water glass, knuckles turning white. One question pounded relentlessly in his head. What is he doing to this place? And then he got his answer sooner than he expected. Right there at the service counter, while Chase boasted over a call, Ethan caught just enough of the conversation to make his blood run cold. Yeah, keep pushing that place down. Honestly, when we snag it at rock bottom, we'll make a killing. Preston says just a couple more weeks and it's done. Papers signed, fast and clean. Even if the old owner crawls back, it'll be too late. Preston, the name hit Ethan like a hammer. Preston Walsh, a notorious real estate shark known for hunting struggling businesses, snatching them up dirt cheap, and flipping them for obscene profits. In that moment, every scattered puzzle piece clicked into place. Chase had faked his identity, seized control of the diner, deliberately poisoned the workplace environment to push good staff out, manipulated the books to tank the revenue, and jacked up operational costs. All of it, every last toxic move, was part of an orchestrated scheme to make it look like the iron skillet was circling the drain. And behind the curtain, a dirty backroom deal to sell it off before anyone could stop them. And the man behind it all was none other than Preston Walsh. Ethan drew in a slow, measured breath, his eyes hard and glinting with the edge of cold steel. If he hadn't come back today, how long before the Iron Skillet Diner sign was ripped down and replaced with some soulless corporate branding? How many people who had poured their hearts into this place would have been cast adrift, forgotten like nameless faces in a passing crowd? No, he wasn't going to let that happen. Right here, sitting in the very place he built from nothing but his own two hands, Ethan Ward wasn't just a man recovering from surgery anymore. He was a man ready for war, a war without swords or bullets, but every strike would cut deeper than any blade, and his enemy wasn't just some slick imposter named Chase Donovan. Behind that grinning face was a far greater power, one that had orchestrated every move with terrifying precision. And Ethan understood now the real game was only just beginning. That night, for the first time since his operation, Ethan felt his heart pounding for reasons far beyond his recovery. It wasn't the weakness of his body. It was the cold, burning fire of clarity, of betrayal uncovered. His hotel room felt suffocatingly small, walls closing in under the sheer weight of his unraveling thoughts. Beside his battered laptop, sat a cold cup of coffee he hadn't touched in hours. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, stayed locked on the screen as his fingers tore through the diner's digital records. And then he found it. The file, Temporary Management Appointment Authorization. Signed by Ethan Ward. The air left his lungs. That signature, perfectly replicated. Every loop, every angle, flawless. If he didn't know with absolute certainty that he'd never signed such a document, he might have believed it himself. A chill bled through his veins. Someone had hacked his digital credentials. Someone had planned the exact moment his body was too weak to fight back. And at that moment, while he lay unconscious on an operating table, Chase Donovan had been slipped into the most powerful position in the business, with all the legal documentation neatly forged and filed. His stomach knotted. He clicked deeper into the system logs. The timestamp on the forged signature lined up precisely with the hours of his surgery. This wasn't negligence, this was a coup. He followed the digital breadcrumbs further and found more, far more than he expected. An asset valuation report, artificially deflated to 80% of the diner's real market value. Attached to it, a trail of documents under a name that made Ethan's blood run cold. Nexus Hospitality. He clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. Nexus, the corporate predator, infamous for buying up beloved local establishments and turning them into sterile, profit-churning franchises. And now, they had his diner in their sights. Nexus Hospitality, the corporate scavenger that circled struggling businesses like vultures, swooping in to buy them for pennies on the dollar, gutting their identities and churning out sterile, soulless franchises. And the name etched onto those preliminary acquisition documents? Preston Walsh, Director of Business Development for Nexus Hospitality. But that wasn't the final blow. As Ethan scoured the approval logs and transaction verifications, another name surfaced, one that made his stomach tighten into a fist. Clint Parker, the same Clint who had stood in this very diner, swearing unwavering loyalty. The man Ethan had trusted with oversight of supply chains and day-to-day operations during his recovery. The man he had once called a friend. Piece by piece, the betrayal snapped into focus, like jagged shards forming a merciless picture. Clint had been working directly with Preston. Together they manufactured a narrative of financial decline, engineering a bleak outlook to depress the diner's valuation. Also, Nexus could swoop in with a lowball offer and save the business. And Chase? Just a prop in their theater of deceit, a slick, grinning puppet installed as a fake heir to lend the illusion of authority, enabling internal sabotage and unchecked abuse. This wasn't just a dirty business deal. This was treachery, a calculated, cold-blooded attack aimed at destroying the very thing Ethan had sacrificed his youth, his health, and his peace of mind to build. Iron Skillet wasn't just a diner. It was a living monument to hard work, to community, to the belief that a place could still feel like home in a world obsessed with convenience and profit margins. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides, the veins rising under his skin. His breath grew sharp as he fought back the storm swelling in his chest. He stood abruptly, stepping toward the open window. Cool night air rushed in, trying and failing to quench the inferno roaring beneath his ribs. "If they think I'm too weak to fight back because of a scar," Ethan muttered, his voice low and sharp as a blade, "they've miscalculated their final move." His eyes burned with fierce clarity. That wasn't the look of a broken man. That was the look of a man who had endured storms and now stood ready to unleash one of his own. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. Instead, he began writing a plan, not just to reclaim what was his, but to drag every last accomplice, Clint, Chase, Nexus Hospitality, into the harsh light of truth. And when the dust settled, they wouldn't just lose their grip on Iron Skillet. They would lose everything. And this time, Ethan Ward wouldn't just win. He would make sure none of them ever forgot exactly how it felt to bet against the wrong man. And this time, he wasn't just playing to win. He was playing to end every betrayal in silence and humiliation. Ethan pulled up Clint Parker's files, tracing back every expenditure Clint had ever authorized. His financial history unfolded like an oil stain spreading over a still lake, filthy and impossible to ignore. Suspiciously high service fees, supply contracts for kitchen equipment marked up nearly double the market price, and most telling, a trail of invoices tied directly to Nexus Hospitality, all aligning perfectly with Clint's conveniently timed business trips. That trip to Las Vegas 3 months ago stood out, an unexplained expense of nearly $8,000, 0 cents. Ethan remembered Clint justifying it in the monthly report as a food and beverage industry conference, but the social media photos told a different story. Clint sitting comfortably in the Bellagio casino, a glittering glass of expensive liquor in hand under chandelier lights. Ethan documented everything meticulously, organizing every piece of evidence neatly into a secured folder labeled The Final Move. Ethan reached out to an old ally, Karen Bishop, a renowned investigative journalist from the local paper. He hadn't forgotten the significant favor she owed him after he'd stood by her through a messy, high-profile lawsuit years back. The call lasted less than 3 minutes, but Karen's voice over the line was sharp as cold steel. If what you're telling me is true, Ethan, this isn't just financial fraud. This is a scandal Nexus Hospitality won't dare breathe a word about. With their shareholder report looming, I'll be at Iron Skillet before tomorrow's staff meeting. Ethan smiled faintly. You don't threaten people like Clint Parker and Preston Walsh with words. You terrify them with the flash of cameras as the cold steel of handcuffs clicks shut around their wrists. Ethan knew exactly the type of man Chase was. Addicted to flash, obsessed with shallow power, and desperate for online validation. So no, Chase wouldn't be arrested quietly. Ethan wanted to deliver him one final lesson, right in front of the very people he had bullied and humiliated. He coordinated with Maria, his loyal manager, to organize a so-called emergency meeting. No one knew the true purpose, but outside, the press and the police would be waiting. But before stepping into that meeting, Ethan had left a little gift right on the desk where Chase usually sat in the manager's office, a gold-embossed envelope. Inside, just a single piece of paper with a scrawled message. You're good, but you'll never be good enough to be me. Yet. And just as Ethan predicted, Chase wouldn't be able to resist opening it right in the middle of the meeting, with every pair of eyes fixed on him. At that very moment, Ethan stepped out from the shadows. Not the weary, recovering man he'd been, but the real owner of Iron Skillet. Standing tall, his eyes sharp as an arrow, aimed straight at the heart of a fraud. That morning, Iron Skillet Diner greeted the dawn, not with the usual comforting aroma of fresh coffee or the familiar sound of hearty laughter, but with a heavy, oppressive silence. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, its warmth not yet reaching the frost-covered windows, and inside, a silent storm was brewing. Ethan sat quietly in the far corner of the diner, his cap pulled low to hide most of his face. From where he sat, he could see the bar and open kitchen area clearly, where Danny, the veteran chef Ethan had always trusted, stood with a deep, sorrowful gaze, like a man on the brink of giving up. And then, at that very moment, Danny untied his apron, folded it carefully, and placed it neatly on the counter. His calloused hands trembled slightly, as if even he didn't want to say what came next. Enough, Danny's rough voice carried across the diner, firm without needing to shout. I've stood in this kitchen for 30 years, treated it like home, but a home's no place to stay when no one wants to come back anymore. A suffocating silence blanketed the room. Everyone, Maria, Tina, even Jerry, stood frozen. And then Danny walked straight out the back door. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. His broad shoulders disappeared into the early morning light. Ethan felt a cold blade twist deep in his chest. This wasn't just the departure of a skilled chef. It was the end of an era he had once worn like a badge of pride. Before he could recover from that blow, a sharp, scathing voice rang out from near the register. Are you blind? Dropping plates now? Chase Donovan's voice sliced through the air, dripping with contempt. The young busboy, Jackson, turned pale, his hands fumbling to gather the shattered porcelain from the floor. He barely had time to stand when Chase's voice cut in again, harsher this time. Go home, don't bother coming back. But I need this job, my mother's sick. Not my problem. Chase sneered, his lips curling into a smug smile. "Don't waste any more of my time." Jackson stood frozen, his eyes welling up as he unfastened his old apron and walked out of the diner in a daze. Under the table, Ethan clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles turned white. That moment struck like a sledgehammer straight to the heart of Iron Skillet and into Ethan's own heart. Everything he had built, everything he once wore like a badge of pride, was being buried mercilessly under dirty, calculated schemes. The staff began whispering about quitting. Maria, looking more exhausted than ever, sat slumped behind the bar, her eyes vacant, lost in the very place that used to be her pride. Heavy sighs filled the room, and every glance was dull and distant. This place Ethan once called home had become nothing more than a soulless shell. But that was the exact moment Ethan knew he could no longer stand on the sidelines. That night, after the diner had closed, Ethan returned. In the thick darkness, he felt his way back to the old electrical cabinet, the very spot where he used to hide a spare key back in the early days. That old habit of caution had become his lifeline. From his coat pocket, Ethan pulled out a set of tiny devices, wireless audio recorders, battery-powered to last up to 72 hours. With the patience of a craftsman, he carefully placed them in strategic locations, behind the cash register console, under the liquor shelf, in the staff break room, and most importantly, in the manager's office, where Chase loved to hide after hours. Everything was linked back to Ethan's personal phone, ready to capture any word that could become evidence. But he didn't stop there. The next morning, Ethan reached out to Janet, a longtime friend and attorney, sending her every document he had gathered regarding the forged digital signature. "I need you ready," he told her. "The moment I have enough will bring this whole rotten mess into the light." Janet's reply was sharp and certain. "Go all the way, Ethan. Don't let them slip through." That afternoon, Ethan went to see another old friend, Detective Mark Gillis, a man who had once enjoyed countless lunches at Iron Skillet. After hearing the full story, Mark looked Ethan dead in the eyes, his face grave. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan, but be careful. Guys like this, they don't just steal money. They know how to make people disappear. People who try to expose them." Ethan only nodded, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. "I've lost everything once before, Mark. I'm not letting it happen again." And so the trap was set. Everything was ready. All that was left was for Chase Donovan and the man pulling his strings to walk right into it. And when they did, in front of the entire staff and every loyal customer who ever cared about Iron Skillet, the truth would finally come to light. After planting the last device, Ethan didn't leave right away. He sat quietly in his car in the parking lot, his gaze steady through the fogged windshield. Inside the diner, the office lights still glowed faintly. Chase Donovan wasn't done for the night. Close to midnight, Chase strutted out, his phone pressed tight against his ear, his voice carrying clearly through the thin glass. Ethan lowered his car window, his heart pounding as he caught snippets of the conversation. "It's almost done, Preston. The staff's burned out. Old Danny's gone, and Maria's just waiting to be pushed out next. Give it a few more days and Iron Skillet will officially belong to Nexus Hospitality. And the best part? We're buying it for 30% below market value." Chase let out a sharp, triumphant laugh, threw on his expensive leather jacket, and strutted out of the diner like he'd just sealed a multi-million-dollar deal. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Nexus Hospitality. So that was the final piece. This wasn't just about sabotaging Iron Skillet. It was about selling it off at a bargain price to Preston Walsh's corporation, the same man Ethan had refused to sign a deal with years ago because of his shady business practices. Ethan immediately hit record. That conversation would be the key to turning everything around. But he knew one recording wasn't enough. He needed Chase to expose himself publicly, right in front of every employee and customer. A grand finale where Chase would bury himself. That morning, the atmosphere inside Iron Skillet felt like a taut wire about to snap. Maria was barely holding herself together, forcing a smile as she greeted customers. Jerry, despite having handed in his resignation, showed up for his shift anyway, eyes darting about like he was waiting for something, anything, to happen. Ethan, wearing plain workman's clothes, quietly took a seat at his usual corner table. No need for elaborate disguises anymore. Watching his beloved diner fall apart piece by piece had long since stripped him of any fear of being recognized. He was ready to face it all. And then the show began. Chase Donovan emerged from the manager's office grinning smugly, a stack of papers in his hand. "I have an important announcement," he called out loudly, drawing every eye in the room. "Tomorrow, Iron Skillet will officially have a new owner. A new era begins, and if you don't like it, there's the door." The room fell deathly silent. Maria looked like she might collapse, her hands gripping the edge of the bar for support. Ethan rose slowly, his phone already in hand, the audio file cued and ready. "Not so fast, acting manager," Ethan called out, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. He stepped out onto the floor, his stride firm and deliberate, reclaiming every inch of the place that had once been his sanctuary. "I think you'll want to hear this." With that, Ethan pressed play. Chase's voice filled the diner, loud and clear. His scheming, the mention of Preston Walsh, the entire dirty plan laid bare for all to hear. Chase's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. He looked around, only to see every eye locked on him. There was no escape. Chase stammered, "It's not what you think." Ethan cut him off, his voice clear and unwavering. "No, we think. Should I go ahead and play the part about the contract you and Preston arranged? Or maybe the falsified financial reports I pulled directly from the computer in that office?" And as if perfectly timed, the diner's front door swung open. Detective Mark Gillis entered, flanked by two uniformed officers. He cast a sharp glance at Chase and spoke in a calm but authoritative tone. "Chase Donovan, you're under arrest for fraud, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to illegally acquire property. You have the right to remain silent." Maria broke into tears. A collective sigh of relief swept through the diner like a sudden summer breeze. Behind the counter, Jerry quietly removed his worn apron, wiping away a tear with his calloused hands. Ethan turned to face everyone, his voice rough with emotion, but filled with conviction. "It's time we take back Iron Skillet. Starting today, this place won't just be a diner. It'll be a home again. A place where people are respected and valued, like we always dreamed it would be." And for the first time in weeks, the sound of applause erupted, loud, genuine, and unstoppable. But this time, it wasn't for the man being led away in handcuffs. It's for the man who fought, quietly, relentlessly, to bring back the soul of the place they called home. The morning sunlight broke through the dusty windows of Iron Skillet, cutting through weeks of gloom, heavier than the fog outside. But today, no one realized that a storm of truth had just swept in to clear away every stain that clung to this place. The urgent meeting Chase had called was meant to deliver his final blow. But the moment the door opened and Ethan Ward appeared, time seemed to freeze. There he stood, the real owner, the man everyone thought had given up. His gaze was calm, but sharper than ever. This wasn't the gentle cafe owner they remembered. This was a man who'd walked through the fire and returned to claim what was his. Chase shot to his feet, his face pale and then flushed red. "Well, who are you?" he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly to the center of the room, his eyes scanning each familiar face. Maria, her eyes glistening with tears. Jerry, silently nodding from behind the kitchen counter. Tina, gripping her notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. And with that, the real era of Iron Skillet began again. "Listen up, everyone." Ethan's voice rang out, deep and steady, cutting through the heavy air of the diner. "I'm Ethan Ward, and I have never had a nephew." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Chase stumbled back a step, frantically pulling out his phone, his voice cracking. "This is all lies. Don't listen to him. I have documents, official papers." "Documents?" Ethan gave a faint, knowing smile. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive, walking calmly to the projector Chase had so proudly used during his scheming meetings. With a single motion, the screen behind him flickered to life. Recordings played. Chase's own voice echoed through the speakers. "These clueless employees won't know a thing. Just a few more days, and Iron Skillet will be in the hands of Nexus Hospitality." Then came Clint Parker's trembling confession over the phone. I admit it, I forged the documents. Preston Walsh cornered me. I didn't see a way out. Each word struck like a hammer, shattering whatever lies remained. Ethan turned, locking eyes with Chase. Anything else you'd like to explain? Ethan asked, his voice calm but cutting. Or should we let the police help you with that? Right on cue, the diner doors swung open. Two officers entered alongside Detective Mark Gillis. The entire room fell silent. Chase Donovan, Mark began, his tone grave. You are under arrest for falsifying legal documents, financial fraud, and conspiracy to illegally acquire property. You have the right to remain silent. Chase lunged, trying to fight his way free, but the cold metal of the cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. The moment the door closed behind the officers, a wave of relief washed over the room. At first, it was just a few claps, hesitant, uncertain. Then it grew, louder, stronger. A standing ovation for the man who stood in front of them and brought their home back to life. Ethan walked slowly toward the bar where Maria stood, her face streaked with tears. Maria, he said softly, handing her an official contract. You're no longer standing in anyone's shadow. From this moment on, you are the general manager of Iron Skillet, and this place, we'll rebuild it, not just with bricks and walls, but with trust and with people who believe in something better. Jerry, standing near the kitchen, took his old apron, the one he had planned to hang up forever, and gently draped it back over his shoulders. His hands trembled slightly as he tightened the knot. I never really left, he said quietly, his voice unsteady but firm. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan returned to the old corner booth, the one where it had all begun. Maria approached, wiping her eyes, smiling through her tears. And what can I get you today, Mr. Ward? Ethan smiled, his eyes brighter than they had been in months. Bring me a plate of fries, the old way, just like you used to make them. In that space, filled with the aroma of crisp golden fries and the rising sound of laughter, Iron Skillet, the place once thought to be lost, shone brightly again. And in that moment, Ethan knew the most important thing he had reclaimed wasn't just the restaurant, it was his family. Right after the recording echoed through the tense room, silence swallowed the entire diner. Chase Donovan stood there, pale as a ghost, his eyes darting around in search of an escape. His lips trembled as he tried to keep them shut, but Ethan took one calm step forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. Maria was no longer hiding in the corner. She stepped out, shoulders back, her eyes blazing with a courage long suppressed under Chase's tyranny. Mr. Donovan, Maria said, her voice firm and clear across the silent room, how many times have you threatened our staff? How many times have you stolen their tips? Fired people just to parade your fake authority? Chase backed away until his back hit the bar. He turned to run, but Jerry and the other staff had already blocked both exits. A silent unity filled the room. And for Ethan, it felt like the greatest victory, one worth more than any profit margin. You believe him? Chase shouted hoarsely. This old man comes back from his deathbed and claims he owns this place? You're all fools. Right at that moment, the police walked in. Two officers approached and pinned Chase in place before he could react. He struggled, panic flooding his eyes. I'll sue all of you. You can't do this. The cold clink of handcuffs cut through his threats. As he was dragged past Ethan, Chase sneered, trying desperately to hang on to his last shred of pride. You think you've won, old man. Everything's already in motion. You'll never save this broken-down dump. Ethan remained still, calm, his voice heavy with the weight of unshakable truth. You're wrong, Chase. There are things you'll never understand. Honor, integrity, and the resilience of the people who work here. The meeting quickly turned into a revival of spirit. Ethan stepped forward, taking off his jacket, rolling up his sleeves, and standing before the big stove, where it had all begun 7 years ago. Maria, he called out with a soft grin, do you still remember the very first version of our fries? The one Jerry said was crispy to the point of no return. Jerry burst out laughing, his voice booming through the diner. Boss, I only said that because you double fried them, to drain all the moisture. Who knew the customers would end up loving them the most? The room erupted in laughter, voices lively and full of warmth. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the air was filled again with something more powerful than success, the feeling of home. That evening, under the warm glow of amber lights, a new sign was raised in front of Iron Skillet. Ethan personally mounted the sign. Beneath the name, Iron Skillet, built by hands, sustained by hearts, was the new slogan. We don't just serve food, we serve kindness. Beside him, Maria quietly wiped away her tears. Jerry leaned against the doorframe, his eyes shining with pride. They all understood. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was home. It was hope. It was a place where every person, no matter how small, had a voice and a purpose. Ethan whispered softly, a promise meant for no one else but himself. This time, I'm never leaving again. The morning sun spilled through the misty windows of Iron Skillet Diner, bathing the freshly painted sign in a pure, golden light. Ethan stood quietly by the window, watching the early bustle of people fill the streets. His heart felt lighter, just like it did 7 years ago, when he first opened the door to this diner. But today, a whole new chapter was beginning. Everyone, Ethan spoke, his voice low but full of emotion during the morning meeting. The room fell silent. This time, every eye turned toward him not with fear or doubt, but with hope. I used to think I could do everything on my own, he began, his gaze drifting toward Maria, standing quietly in the corner. But it's the hard days that have taught me. One person might build a restaurant, but only a family can keep it standing. He stepped forward and handed Maria a formal letter of appointment. From today, Maria is officially the general manager of Iron Skillet, no longer standing behind, but standing beside me to guide this ship. And with that comes a salary worthy of her sacrifice and dedication. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, streaming down her sun-kissed cheeks. She couldn't find the words, but her radiant smile said everything. Ethan turned to the rest of the staff, holding up small envelopes. And here is what you all deserve. The money Chase Donovan once stole, I'm using it to reward each and every one of you. Thank you for staying when this place was at its worst. Applause broke out, warm, vibrant, and heartfelt. Jerry, the veteran chef, stepped forward and took Ethan's hand, his eyes glistening. Boss, I still owe you one batch of fries, just like the old days. The very next day, the young employee whom Chase had unjustly fired returned. His eyes sparkled as he held the freshly folded apron that Ethan had personally prepared for him. In the corner, Tina, the young waitress who once quietly cried over a discount coupon for an elderly regular, now smiled warmly as Mrs. Abernathy sat back in her usual seat, a full cup of coffee before her, and a familiar, loving smile on her face. That afternoon, Ethan stepped back into the kitchen himself. The familiar sizzle of hot oil echoed through the space, and the unmistakable aroma of fresh onion rings spread across the diner. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, watching in silence as their owner returned to that old cast-iron skillet, the very one that had built the Iron Skillet's reputation. The onion slices were dipped in just the right amount of batter and gently dropped into the sizzling oil. The crisp, cheerful crackle sounded like a celebration of old times. When the final golden, perfectly crisp ring was lifted out, Ethan said only one thing. A single onion ring can expose an entire scheme. But more importantly, it reminds us, when hearts stay true and values remain unshaken, no force in the world can bury them. He handed the plate of onion rings to Jerry, his old friend who had witnessed every high and low. Jerry took a bite, smiled and nodded. Still tastes like kindness, boss. The diner erupted in laughter, light and free. That evening, under the soft golden lights, Ethan stood quietly outside the diner, his fingers interlocked. Maria stepped out beside him, her voice gentle. Planning to finally get some rest, boss? She teased half seriously. Ethan chuckled softly, his eyes fixed on the newly mounted sign that gleamed in the warm night air. Iron Skillet Diner, built by hands, sustained by hearts. Not yet, Maria, but this time I'll learn to share. This dream, it belongs to all of us now. And there, surrounded by laughter, the comforting aroma of food, and hopeful sparkling eyes, Iron Skillet Diner, the true home to so many souls, had found itself again.